Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
Liam.
Thanks for coming. Hi, Nichole. You comfortable?
Totally.
Excellent. Me too. So few numbers are as important, yet so poorly understood as the credit score. Credit Karma, whose co-founder is sitting next to me now, Nichole, was launched in 2007, and it's helped more than 80 million users, about right?
Actually, 85. So
85
we're publicly
million.
announcing 85.
There you go. 85 million users kind of understand this metric of creditworthiness and how they might go about improving it. You've pushed into mortgages, insurance, auto finance, and have in the process got a $4 billion valuation, which is pretty impressive. And Nichole's going to help us understand the market opportunity in consumer finance here and kind of all the technology around that, and help us understand how we're all going to be managing our finances in the future. So, Nichole, why don't you start by giving us a kind of overview of just the basic concept of Credit Karma? I mean, what's the problem that it's supposed to solve from a user's point of view?
Yeah, so when you think about credit scores, they're really a means towards something you want. Right? Consumers go to look at their credit scores to understand, how do I get a house? How do I get my car? How do I manage the products I have? Do I have the right rates? And that all starts with this tiny little 3-digit credit score. And so at Credit Karma, we wanted to work on demystifying that so consumers could help themselves with their financial health, whether that's knowing what their score is, knowing how to manage it, or knowing what the banks are looking at. So we started there, and many people know us as a free credit score site, but over the last 2, 3, 4 years, we've really began to go beyond credit. So in the US, we help consumers do their taxes for free. We help them find unclaimed money. There's a how much can you buy for your home hub center. So you go and it takes all your finances behind the scenes and talks to you about what you can afford. So we've touched on a lot of those pieces so that consumers can take the data that we have and absorb it in a very simplistic and easy way to make better financial decisions every day. And the way the model actually works is that when consumers find a product that they love and financial institutions find a consumer that they want, that's when Credit Karma makes money. So many sites today will make money when you show them a banner ad or you get a consumer to click. But if you think about that, that's not always in the interest of the consumer. In the US, we have many rates that are 0.99, but we have less than 1% of consumers that actually get those rates after they apply. So helping consumers know what's truly available to them and helping advertisers have great consumer experiences with consumers they can approve is really the heart of the win-win model and how Credit Karma drives its business.
Sure. And you've had quite an interesting, slightly unconventional route into the Founders Club, you know, where this club that seems to be chock full of people, kind of spin-offs out of Stanford and stuff. And, you know, additionally, the company was founded at a pretty inauspicious time for credit, kind of, you know, just entering the 2007, going into 2008 credit crunch. Could you talk a little bit about the background and, you know, how you and Ken, one of the other co-founders, kind of actually came into this?
Yeah, so definitely, you know, Ken, Ryan, and myself, the 3 co-founders, are deep part of the 99%. So Ken came from Vegas, and the other 2 of us came from the Midwest. So no Stanford degrees, no building empire from our parents' garage. You know, I actually come from a town of 1,700, and people locally call it corn, and soybean. So it's super, super small. I went to college at Miami of Ohio and, you know, had a chance over time to grow into a consulting role where I met Ken, and we had a business idea that we wanted to take domestic. And that was the moment when consumers, it was early 2007, when the adoption of the internet was continuing to become more mainstream. So a lot of early adopters from a credit perspective were really subprime consumers, and banks weren't driving applications or driving business online just yet. But when we came online, we helped put filters in so that, you know, banks could find who they wanted and consumers could find the products that they loved as well.
Great. And, you know, we're at a business conference. We've mentioned the $4 billion valuation already. what is what's the revenue model here? I mean, I think it's quite clear from a consumer point of view why I would go on the app. I want to see my credit score. I want to understand what that means, get other kind of types of tips and stuff. But how do you make money? What's the financial model?
Yeah, so when consumers apply for something that they get approved for or get funded for, the banks or financial institutions actually pay us. So again, it's no interest in the financial institutions showing an ad or having a consumer click on something. So we've been growing quite substantially, and as you said, we took in $500 million in investment, which were common shares, so it was a secondary process. And the valuation is just over $4 billion. So today we're the largest VC-valued personal finance app in the world.
And what's the kind of competitive landscape? I mean, whose lunch are you eating, if you like? I mean, we can talk, I guess, first about the US, your home market.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so whether it's the US or the UK, so many of you may have heard, we announced on Monday that we recently purchased Nichole, which is a UK-based free credit score site with just over 4 million members. And we'll be looking to take the US playbook to the UK and helping expand what consumers do with their credit and the reasons to visit Nichole as well as Credit Karma in the US, and also expanding the things that we can help you with from a financial services perspective.
Sure. Great. And almost uniquely, amongst a lot of kind of high-valued, fast-growing fintechs, you're actually profitable.
Yep.
Now, when you speak to fast-growing young companies that aren't profitable, a lot of the time the explanation is actually that's a conscious decision we've made. We're prioritizing growth, or getting users on the platform, or some other metric. I mean, how can you explain is it 2015 you were profitable from? How can you explain that relatively quick, if you want to? I mean, I don't know if. Still several years, then it's not that quick, but how do you explain that?
Well, you touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
When we started the business, we ran head into the recession. So we started in 2007, and we actually launched in 2008. We went from having over 300 offers on the website to having less than 3, and ultimately those went down within 3 to 4 weeks.
Right.
So we had to build a product that consumers really loved. And we had to, as founders, we had to believe in that. Whether that was, reducing payroll, whether that was selling furniture in the office, regardless of what it was, we had to be all in. I think you heard that from a couple of the different panels that were out here. And we did. And it's been a journey towards both sustainable growth and measured investment. So I think when you're disciplined and you're able to persevere, profitability isn't a challenge.
So that kind of early stress, in a kind of Darwinian sense, made you tougher almost, because you had to be able to survive when there wasn't necessarily, funding forthcoming.
Yeah. So the funding early on was definitely to continue to support people.
Yeah.
So that we can grow. And I think people always wonder, why don't you grow faster? One of the things I would say is onboarding hundreds of people a year and even thousands of people a year, it's a thing. You have to be very skilled at it. You have to manage it. You have to have teams that can actually absorb those thousands of people, and you have to have facilities that can bring them on. And you have to have a culture that's able to make sure that the people get oriented into the way to do things in a Karma-ly way, right? So we have some unique things that we do differently, like putting consumers first and foremost, and taking lower rates on cost per acquisition if it's the right thing for the consumer. And those aren't natural, right? So I was just in Leeds meeting with the Nichole team since we announced on Monday, and we were talking about how do we order things between acquisition, engagement, and monetization from a development perspective. And at Credit Karma, first and foremost, we need to get the consumer to the door. And then we need to deliver on a product experience that's so amazing that you wouldn't go anywhere else. And if you can do just those two things, money will always happen, right? And so I walked in and they had monetization at the top because they wanted to scale revenues. And in my mind, it's about scaling users in a way where you know that the data and the technology partnerships that Scale enables with banks like Barclays or HSBC or American Express the money will come as the output of that. And we have confidence in that because we've done that in the U.S.
I mean, you mentioned the kind of the consumer offering there and the technology. Could you, we're at a tech conference, could you talk a little bit more about, as a user, what are the actual kind of technologies that are going on behind? I mean, I know you guys work a lot with AI and machine learning, and the intention of all of this is to try and come up with recommendations for how people are going to kind of progress financially. Yeah. Could you talk a bit about that? Because, I mean, presumably that's part of the answer around why didn't this company exist 15, 20 years ago? You had a lot of the same problems, right? You had people, not understanding their credit scores, paying too much for their mortgages. So what's the kind of tech that's going on?
So I always think about when you're driving down the road and you see a ad on the side, whether it's on a screen or on a billboard or what have you. And I imagine, how would you make that efficient? Ultimately, you'd be able to identify every pair of eyes and know all the financial service data and all the intent of that consumer and be able to show each one of them a different ad, right? Because what I need and what you need from a financial service perspective, and everyone in this room, is completely different, both from what we can get and what we need. And so at Credit Karma, because we've grown to such a scale, we have the data to be able to determine if your mortgage is mispriced, right? So if you took out a loan, and this was an easier example years ago when rates were going down, but if you took out a loan years ago and rates had gone down over time, or your credit score had gone up, there's probably a better loan out there for you today, right? If you took out a student credit card and you're now a professional, my suspicion is your credit score is higher, and you have a larger income, and you're able to actually access better credit with better rewards at a lower rate. And so what our technology does is it runs through all the data that we have, both financial data as well as behavioral data, help us understand what offers to show you. And if there aren't offers available that we believe to be relevant at a certain level, we actually show you other content. So we'll talk to you about how to manage your taxes more intelligently. We'll talk to you about, can you learn these 3 things about how to manage the total credit limit or usage of each of your credit cards, because that's what matters inside a credit score. So, there's many times when consumers come on our site and the first thing that they'll see is their score and educational content. But all of that content is personalized to that individual. So it doesn't waste the space and creates an efficient experience that makes you feel like Credit Karma is wrapping around you and holding you through this experience.
You mentioned a little bit earlier the acquisition you just done in the UK. I mean, obviously, there are very different financial rules and regulations between different markets. Yep. A lot of the fintechs I talk to in Europe kind of have complained a lot about how difficult it is to scale across borders when you have quite a fragmented market. I mean, when you're moving from the US to Canada, a place like the UK, what are the kind of tensions that you need to resolve in how the operations work? I mean, that's something that you've looked at, right, as a kind of international expansion.
Absolutely. So this is, as an entrepreneur and a builder, this is one of the things that I love the most, is like, how do you solve new problems? So I actually think that with coming to the UK and building a platform from scratch, even though we have 4 million members, we're going to be in a situation where we can take security by design as something that's native to our experience versus having a really large tech platform and consumer experience that I need to go back and put security by design into. So if you think of GDPR, it's an area where we have a host of attorneys who are helping us stay super smart, both in our financial service relationships as well as our product experience. But I feel really good that we get to build it from the ground up. On the other side, when you think about PSD2 and open banking, that's really a great opportunity for us to bring more data into our data warehouse to make our recommendations and our consumer experience just that much more relevant and rich for each of our members. Mm.
Could you talk a little bit more about the kind of, you meant PSD2, I mean, if anyone who doesn't know, this is a kind of regulatory shift in Europe. This basic way of thinking about it is kind of open banking is another way. Could you talk a bit more about what are the kind of opportunities that you see there for you in open banking?
Sure. So PSD2 requires each of the financial institutions in the UK to allow consumers consent to sharing their debit and credit information with third-party platforms. And so for us today, when I think of a credit report, it's sort of a summary of what you've done on that. Maybe you spent £2,500, but I don't know what you spent it on, and I don't know if that was 90% of your income, 80% of your income, or 70% of your income. So I have some visibility gaps. As this data becomes more readily available and accessible, building a product around it to help consumers shop smart, and both making them aware of, is what they're buying the cheapest that they can, as well as are they running their day-to-day finances in a way that makes them stable. I think we've all, understand that a recession is something that's probably nearer than it is far. And in those times, I think being very sharp on what you're buying and how you're managing your finances are going to become critical.
I mean, you raise a recession there. I mean, let's talk about the kind of macroeconomic thing here. I mean, the thing that everybody talks about, this is something that central banks have been talking about both in Britain and in America, is you have an enormous amount of consumer debt at the moment. And there is a lot of kind of concern about the size of consumer debt relative to the economy and about people's ability to honor a lot of that borrowing as the interest rate cycle kind of starts to turn again. I mean, is that a business risk for you guys? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't see it as a business risk at all, and primarily for two different reasons. One, we have a portfolio of reasons consumers interact with Credit Karma, but also there's a portfolio of things they do with Credit Karma. So consumers are still going to have to go buy auto insurance in the UK twice a year, right? So I think that's one area. On the other side, when it comes to debt, generally during a downturn, consumers are still able to access debt. It really becomes about what channels are some of the cheapest channels for the FIs to acquire those consumers. Said it differently, which channels are actually the most efficient and which ones do they have the most control on. And when you think about the control that they have at Credit Karma and the efficiency in the model, we tend to be one of their first go-to channels. So we worry about it, but not overall as a business. From a consumer perspective, we feel very strongly that the debt that you have you should have the least cost model, meaning that if your credit actually affords you access to a loan at 2.99 and your current is 5.99, that we should encourage you to go out and change that. That's not encouragement to get more debt. That's encouragement to manage the debt you have effectively. Additionally, if you are looking to shop for something, we want to get you into the right product, the lowest rate product the first time. And I'm using the word lowest rate, and I don't want that to be confused with rate shopping, because some consumers are looking for certain sets of rewards or certain sets of services that might not be the lowest rate in the entire listing, but might be the lowest rate for what they want. So we try to put that in context.
Got it. Okay. I mean, you talked about having the lowest rate possible for the debt that you have. I mean, I wonder if you could talk, get your crystal ball out a little bit. I mean, how are we going to be managing our finances, in a few years hence? There's this buzzword that I think I've heard you use, which is autonomous finance.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk a lot about autonomous driving. There is a scenario in which you have people automatically refinancing mortgages and stuff like that. Is that a vision that you have, and what's the kind of timeline that you think we should be thinking about there? And third question, just what needs to happen for us to get there?
Yeah. So maybe I can walk you through an analogy, and then we can talk a little bit about autonomous finance as well. So one of the evolutions that have happened over the last decade is really around the concept of a self-driving cars, right? Autonomous driving. And if you were to ask me 10 years ago if I would get into like a little shell and let it drive me somewhere, I'd kind of laugh at you. And if you were to ask me if I would put my kids inside that thing, there'd be some expletives, right? I'd say, hell no. But today, I kind of sit there and I kind of step in, and I don't always shut the door, but I sneak out to Google and give it a couple tries and roll it around every now and then. And the reason that I do that is because over a decade ago, Google started showing maps. And when they showed maps, they talked a lot about what is the distance from A to B. And they quickly evolved to talk about what was the shortest time route, not distance. And that was a major change. And it drove confidence with consumers because when you were sitting dead stop, but it said that you were 6 minutes from your destination, it showed red, greens, and yellows, right? And from then, at about that point, we started to see Uber and Lyft. And Uber and Lyft started to separate the profession of a taxi driver into a technology service and a profession of a driver. So all of a sudden, I've got this map thing that's building trust with me, and I believe in it because time and time again, it's accurate. Now I'm willing to get into some random person's car who's a contract driver, and I'm allowing them to drive to a place they don't know, because they too are trusting that technology. And I'm taking 10, 20 different routes to my house late at night. And the last change that sort of came to play was, it's not Lexus, it's not Tesla, it's, who's the car?
Tesla?
Tesla,
Yeah.
Thank you. All of a sudden Tesla comes out, and we have consumers sitting behind wheels but not holding the wheel. Yeah. So now I've separated the route, which is now technology-driven, and the driving, which is now technology-driven. And the more that consumers get behind that wheel, and they're going to a place but not knowing the route, and they're trusting the time, and they're actually not driving the car, all of a sudden I'm ready to get into a little bubble that's going to take me somewhere.
So
without
it's a rapid
all
turnaround.
three of those changes, I don't have trust in any one of those three technologies or experiences to put myself or my family in autonomous driving. When I think of Credit Karma, it's very similar. If you're coming to our site and we're showing you the most relevant thing, and we're doing it in ways that are always best for your finances, and we're doing it in a way where, like Amazon, we're using your data to make shopping for things simple as putting your thumb down, right? We have your name, your address, your identification information. We can fill out applications so you can get your application done while you're in the grocery store checkout line. Over time, you're going to say, I love this thing, I trust this thing, just do it for me. Don't make me go to you, right? And at that point, that's where autonomous finance really starts to move forward. And the vision of, today you hand your money to a money manager, but you don't hand your finances to anyone. In the future, our vision is that will be managed by a third-party technology platform. And our goal is to make sure that that's Credit Karma.
Great. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Nichole, thank you. It was a pleasure. Yeah, see you again.
Thanks.